I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and I am back for another stock blank stenciling video. Guar gum edition / experimentation. Today we will be dyeing one, or at least one, stroll fingering weight sock blank. This yarn is 75% superwash merino wool, 25% nylon, and the blanks are double stranded, so they unravel into two matched 50-gram balls of yarn. In a previous video, I started stenciling on using a black dye, and then I diluted that dye with more guar gum to help make the color be lighter, and we ended up getting a gradient of more of a black to a medium gray with our stenciled pattern. I want to try something similar today, but instead of diluting our dye with more guar gum so it's still nice and thick, I want to dilute our dye that we're going to start with initially with water. So that way, as we go, we're going to have less and less of our thickener, which might mean that we're going to have sharp lines down at one end and then lines that are more blown out at the other. Similar to the experiment I did in the past where I did a stencil and half of it used a guar gum mixture, the other half was just the dyes in water, and you could see a huge difference between there. I just thought that this would be cool to have a sharper color separation on one side and to have it be potentially more flowy down on the other. But now I'm going to go ahead and pre-soak this sock blank in some water that has some acid in it already. It is one of those white basins half full of water, and it has 2 tablespoons of white vinegar in it. I like to mix up my guar gum at a ratio of 1/2 teaspoon of guar gum in 1 cup of water. And I do this in my magic bullet because that is way easier to dissolve the powder really quickly versus trying to do it by hand. That's a really slow process. Since I don't have a dedicated dyeing magic bullet, I always make a large stock of guar gum in advance of transitioning my kitchen from a food kitchen to a dyeing kitchen. And the container that I use for this guar gum then becomes a dedicated dye container. I hope that makes sense. But this ratio is one that is nice and thick, and you can dilute either with liquid dyes or add a little bit of water as needed. In general, guar gum mixtures don't last for long periods of time. Eventually they will spoil. So I recommend that you plan to use it close to when you make it, but saving it for a week or so hasn't been an issue for me. Today, the colors we are going to be dealing with the most are going to be some emerald green mixed with our guar gum. And then we also will have this mixture that is some extreme blue plus a little bit of fluorescent fuchsia. Now, I just removed these popsicle sticks and paint brushes I've been using into some water. And I think that this will be the water that I will use to dilute things as we move forward. Maybe. We'll see. Because one thing that will happen is that as we dilute our guar gum here, as we dilute it and make it less paint-like and more liquid, we are also going to be diluting the pigment, and so that'll get more pastel, which honestly, now that I think about it, I think that that is fine. But the green as a color I know spreads out a lot more, so I figured that was a good candidate for our project here today. And maybe I'll just go ahead and with this this brush, we'll just work it on in for this greenish. It's slightly more teal than it was before. But yeah, you can see how the guar gum in here has globbed up. I think therefore we're going to want to work with just adding some straight water. I am going to protect my work surface with some plastic wrap before we bring over our pre-soaked blank. And the reason for this is that way we won't deal with any dye transfer from one section of the blank to the other, at least as much as possible. Okay, and actually, I think another thing I want to do is take our guar gum mixture and remove about a little even more than half of it and set that aside. This way it'll make a bigger impact as we dilute it. I am a little bit worried about the paintbrush, but I think we're gonna have 6 different opportunities for different concentrations of our guar gum. And if we need to, if we're not seeing anything dramatic, we can start adding a little bit of our mixture to some water instead of the other way around. So we will see. But right now I am spreading out this blank along the plastic wrap. Now I like to use 12-inch stencils. I find that they fit pretty well onto blanks. And I picked a design and a stencil that has 2 real sections. So we can do one round of the color, dilute it, do the next section with some blending, a little bit of blending in between maybe. I'm not super concerned, but I am curious to see what will happen. Okay, we're gonna start off with I guess this first area, and we've got the most guar gum we're gonna have throughout this whole process. And I'm taking this foam brush because I like using that to apply dye to stencils on blanks. I find that it works really, really well. Our color is very, very green. The blue did not make as much of an impact as I expected, but that is okay. Now, when things spread out, we might see some breaking, which means we could see some separation of colors into the different pigments. I accidentally got a little excited and went over the stencil there. That is not a big deal. All right, now let's see. Let's add, I was gonna add 100 milliliters of water. Let's add, I guess, closer to 50 versus 100. This actually should dilute this diluted things a fair amount. We might have a dramatic shift right away. But the nice thing is that we'll still have a matched set of yarn near the end. And with the foam brush, I am attempting to like squeeze it in the cup a bit so we get the new kind of pigment soaked in. And we're gonna come and add it. So right now, the color does not feel lighter. I can say that it definitely feels less thick. So what, we started off with an equivalent of a ½ teaspoon of guar gum per 1 cup of water. And then that was diluted some as we added some acid dyes to it. So that wasn't the entire concentration. And I'm not measuring the volume as we remove some of the dye and add water because, well, that's just not part of what we're doing here today. And so I'm also not going to measure the amount of water that I add. We might have a much more dramatic shift at some point, but for now, let's remove the first stencil. Okay, I already see a difference. Already you can see the crispness, the sharpness of the lines that we did first. And then the lines are a little bit softer over here. Not completely blown out, but softer. Okay, I have rinsed off the stencil and I'm bringing it back over, lining it up approximately with what we had before. And then this step is actually pretty important because I've learned the hard way. You do want to come and sort of press the water that's stuck to the top of the stencil off. I think it's okay for a little water on the bottom to go into the blank, but if you have too much water on the top, then that does dilute your dye. But speaking of dye dilution, we're going to do that again. And I'm going to add 50 milliliters again. Stirring this up. I would say we probably had less than 50 milliliters of our dye to start with. But one of the real questions is how quickly are we diluting things on the foam brush as well? That I don't know. I don't have an answer for that for you. Okay, and we're going to carry on. The color is definitely looking lighter to me. But now as we add more and more color on, the effects of adding water are going to change the color of the dye a little bit less. Or just because we're not removing as much volume of the dye with each round. So if I add 50 milliliters of water again, you know, we'll probably still see some spread, but the color won't get dramatically lighter unless we increase our water volume even more. Okay, I just added 100 milliliters of water. So we've added approximately 200 milliliters of water so far. This diluted everything by about half, and we now have a very full cup. And so we will remove some of this volume before diluting it more. But we're gonna come in and do this. I wanted the color to start getting lighter because I wanted to be able to show that off. I'd like there to be a gradient of these features in addition to things spreading out more. I thought that that would be nice and fun. And it's hard to say, because it's hard to say if I'm seeing dye on top of the stencil or if I'm seeing these dyes spread below. Because now the volume of water that I have in the brush matters a lot more. And I think it's gonna matter a lot more for how things overall are going to spread. And we're starting to see why that guar gum is so important. And the guar gum is so important as a thickener because it's just, the lines are less sharp. This is so cool. I'm really enjoying this effect. All right, I am gonna take this diluted dye and add about 100 milliliters of it out. Okay, so that has moved into a cup of water. We'll use that for some kind of leave no dye behind. And now I'm going to eyeball the amount that I'm adding. I can see where the water level of this is in the cup. And I attempted to add about as much water as was present below. So I don't know, I didn't measure that volume, but I don't think that that is super important because, I mean, we're getting a gradient here that is really cool. Now, one question that sometimes people have, is should you add acid to the dyes itself? Would that help? And to be honest, it might help. It might help a lot. It really, really does depend though. It depends just, I guess, on a number of factors, but it could absolutely help to have acid in there for things to strike faster. But the bigger difference, especially if you're dealing with a pigment that doesn't strike super fast, like our green, I'm gonna mix up with the sponge. With a pigment like this green, you're gonna want, it might not make as much of a difference because the emerald green is a pigment that does not strike very fast at all. There are some colors like, I don't know, maybe frozen blue, that one strikes pretty fast, pink orchid, colors like that, that if we were doing this, we might not see as extreme of a change of what we're seeing here today. But also the acid being present, there are pigments, I don't know about acid dyes, but there are pigments in general where if you have acid mixed in with your dye, then the dyes, it can change the solubility of the dyes. So it might not be as advisable. Okay, this time I'm adding a lot of water. That is more than double the volume of what we had before. Of course, there is likely something left in the brush that is affecting things, but I would say that now we pretty much have no guar gum left. It would be very, very close, but we do still have some color, which is nice. And so I do feel a difference as I'm adding the pigment with the way that the water is coming off onto the yarn. I don't know. I feel like at some point the spread might start to be very similar for these different colors. But I'm really, really happy to have done this experiment. I am so excited to just see like how this turns out, even if we didn't see any color breaking or anything like that. Let's remove this final one. And so, you know what? Things are definitely way lighter over here. We have continued to dilute the dye, but I would say around here, maybe around here, maybe these last three, they're all pretty similar in how blown out they are. Let me shift the camera so you can see that edge a little better. This one here is still hazy, but it is sharp compared to those last ones. Because as we add more water volume, you know, you can see almost where that petal was, and it just sort of like spread out. And when the dye is thicker like it is down here, it's a lot harder to get the dye to spread in a similar way. So I'm super excited, y'all. And I know that was a really, really bad y'all. And a bad you all. It was bad both ways. I'm gonna let this sit here on the counter before we wrap it up to go steam set it. Oh, actually, never mind. The steamer basket is free. Ha! I thought the steamer basket had something in it, and I figured, okay, we'll finish that off. But no, I heat the steamer basket up specifically for this project. Do I have enough overhang? Not quite. I'm gonna grab a little bit more plastic wrap here to make rolling this up a little bit easier. It's possible we might see some colors spread out more. I don't know how likely that is, but it's possible that over time in the steamer basket we might see that. But oof, the colors went through really well. Okay, I'm gonna go steam set this for 30 minutes. For at least 30 minutes anyway. It's been 30 minutes, so I'm gonna turn off the heat on our steamer basket. And I'm now going to remove our sock blank. And you know, we can't tell if any of the colors spread because this is the end with the most guar gum over up at the top. But I'm gonna set this aside to cool completely so we can wash it. Let's unwrap our blank and see how it turned out. I do enjoy these reveal moments. So we have our most guar gum. The lines there are still very sharp. You can see the design. And the second and the third, you can still see that flower design pretty well. But then, yep, we're spreading out. Spreading out. Now there's still elements, because I think there's some guar gum in there, where you can see exactly where the colors were placed, which is cool. But yeah, it doesn't seem like we have any bleeding going on. Which is always good. So now we can wash it. Don't worry, we'll take a look at the finished blank once it's dry. But this was a really, really fun little exercise. And there could be some really cool design elements to this too. So one thing that I could do is do this kind of dilution with, say, the green, but then do something going in the reverse order with another color. So that way, like, say a blue, we get a blue spread around the sharpness here, and we have another color that is really sharp over those ones over there. And so that could be fun. Or just have sharp everything all over everything. Now, normally when I wash yarn, I use the coldest water that I have, unless the middle of winter it's so cold that it's painful. But I'm going for a little bit lukewarm because we want to make sure that we dissolve the guar gum because we don't want to let it dry on the yarn. But I'm not feeling any sliminess or anything of it in the yarn. I just added some soap, so I'm now going to fill this up. All right, and let's see. I'm not seeing any color bleeding. Wahoo! I added a lot of soap. I don't think the soap's necessarily necessary for the guar gum, but I do enjoy showing when my colors are nice and wash fast. So, I'm going to rinse out the soap and then probably rinse this another 1 or 2 times to just make sure that guar gum is out. And then I'm going to put this through my spin dryer, hang it up to dry, and we'll take a look at the blank and how the colors have spread from the right side onto the wrong side and all of that jazz. Here is the finished dry blank. I love that even though things are so blown out over here, you still can feel elements of the stencil. Like you can feel elements of some of these lines here because of the way that the dyes, even though they spread, they pooled a little bit to give some feel of that pattern and shape. Would it be possible to do this overall technique, but instead of making the dye lighter, to just make the color more and more blown out? Sure. If you made a guar gum stock and you measured the amount of, like the volume of guar gum mixture you had, the volume of the green dye you added, and then made a dye stock that was just water, but with that same amount of green dye, so you had a similar proportion, you could create this similar effect where you are mixing things together with less and less and less guar gum to get things more blown out towards the end and have some intermediates that are less sharp. However, when the colors are getting more and more blown out, they probably will appear a little bit lighter. If you're applying a similar amount of dye, but the dye is spreading a little more, then it might not feel as deep. So yes, I think that that could work, but I really, really like the gradient and having the colors get softer and lighter as you move from one end to the other. I just think that that is so cool. Let's flip our blank over and take a look at the wrong side. We had reasonable color penetration here. I still think we likely will see some reverse speckling once this is unraveled. What do I mean by reverse speckling? I mean the effect of the resist that you get from these stitches. So if we take a saturated section and pull the blank apart, okay, most of what we see in there is green, but there are some teeny, teeny dots of white. You can barely see them over here, and that comes from the resist of the yarn and the blank being in a stitch. Let's see how we're doing over here. Yeah, they're gonna be very subtle and very small white little specks within those areas. So when you unravel this, when you get to this section, it's not gonna be all, when you get to this section, it's not gonna be all green. They'll be mostly green with some tiny white specks in there. And that's what I call reverse speckles. I am not planning on unraveling this sock blank today. And I won't unless maybe someone purchases this video as a last minute lab partner before I've gone ahead and edited it and they maybe want it unraveled. In that circumstance, I will happily pop up footage of the unraveled blank. And actually, if someone purchases it after this video and wants it unraveled, I'll probably do a short that I'll publish. I did one of those before of another blank that I unraveled. And so that's the kind of content that I plan to do as shorts here on this channel. Things that maybe are a follow-up to a video or add something extra beyond like some fun time lapses and clips from the videos themselves. For things like that, you can check out my short form content on TikTok and Instagram. I am Rebecca from ChemKnits, and I really hope that you have enjoyed this video. I love dyeing sock blanks. I think it's a lot of fun and allows different types of artistic expression beyond what you can do on yarn that's already in a hank. And I know that I filmed a bunch of guar gum sock blank videos in a row here, but you can do a lot. You can do a lot with guar gum that isn't related to stencils and sock blanks. And I hope to film a few more videos for 2023 that involve me using guar gum to get sharp, small sections of color on yarn itself. Like yarn hanks versus a blank. If you want to see me play more around with dyeing yarn, please subscribe to the ChemKnits Tutorials YouTube channel. I post at least twice a week. We also have live streams and other fun things. And so it's worth having your notifications on so you never miss a new video. And honestly, this is the biggest way you can help support the content here. I also have, in addition to the social media that I've mentioned already, I have a Patreon, and you can find links to everything down in the video description. Thank you so much for watching.